February 10th, 2026, 9:37 p.m. Eastern Time. While most Americans were settling in for the night, Donald Trump was awake, furious, and typing. What came next wasn't a policy statement. It wasn't a diplomatic communique. It was a social media meltdown that would reveal just how badly the Trump administration has misunderstood the threat Canada actually poses. "I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given them." The bridge in question? The Gordie Howe International Bridge, a $4.7 billion infrastructure project connecting Detroit and Windsor. A project Canada paid for entirely. A project Trump's own administration approved years ago. But here's what makes this moment so significant. This wasn't really about a bridge. This was about a man realizing he's already lost a geopolitical chess match he didn't even know he was playing. Because while Trump was threatening to block a bridge opening, Mark Carney was in Beijing, signing deals that would fundamentally reshape North American power dynamics for the next 50 years. And by the time the White House figured out what was happening, the damage was already done. Let me tell you about the phone call that happened the next morning. The one where Canada's Prime Minister had to explain basic facts to the President of the United States. And why that phone call represents something far more dangerous than Trump realizes. This isn't about tariffs anymore. This isn't about trade disputes. This is about the moment when America's closest ally decided it was done asking for permission. And Trump just handed them the perfect excuse to leave. Let's go back 3 weeks. January 16th, 2026, Beijing, China. Mark Carney steps off the plane at Beijing Capital International Airport. This is his first visit to China as Prime Minister. It's also the first visit by any Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017. The timing is deliberate. The symbolism is unmistakable. For months, Trump had been calling Carney Governor Carney, implying Canada was just another American state. He'd threatened 100% tariffs. He'd suggested Canada should become the 51st state. He'd insulted Canadian sovereignty at every opportunity. And now, Canada's Prime Minister was standing in Beijing, about to sign a deal that would prove Trump's leverage wasn't what he thought it was. The agreement was straightforward but significant. China would lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed from 85% to 15%. A drop that would unlock $4 billion in market access for Canadian farmers. China would lift anti-dumping duties on Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas. Another $3 billion in export markets opening up. In exchange, Canada would allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market annually at a reduced tariff of 6.1%. A controlled valve, not a floodgate. The total value? Over $7 billion in new trade opportunities for Canadian agriculture and seafood industries. But here's what made Trump's reaction so telling. He didn't respond like someone negotiating trade policy. He responded like someone who'd been personally betrayed. Within hours of the announcement, Trump posted, "If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken." He threatened 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods. Not 25%, not 50%, 100%. But here's the problem with Trump's claim. It's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how trade agreements work. The Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, the very trade deal Trump himself negotiated, includes rules of origin requirements. Chinese goods coming through Canada don't automatically get tariff-free access to the U.S. market. They have to meet strict content requirements. The vast majority wouldn't qualify. Carney knew this. His trade negotiators knew this. Anyone who'd actually read Kuzma knew this. But Trump didn't seem to know this, or didn't care. Instead, he made an even more bizarre claim. The first thing China will do is terminate all ice hockey being played in Canada and permanently eliminate the Stanley Cup. Read that again. The President of the United States genuinely posted that China would ban hockey in Canada. It was absurd. It was laughable. But it also revealed something crucial. Trump wasn't responding to what Carney had actually done. He was responding to what he feared it represented. Canada finding alternatives. Canada building relationships that didn't require American approval. Canada demonstrating that Trump's leverage, his threats, his tariffs, his bluster, had limits. And that's what terrified him. To understand why Trump reacted so violently to the China deal, you have to understand what happened 3 days before in Davos, Switzerland. January 20th, 2026. The World Economic Forum. Mark Carney takes the stage. The speech he's about to give has been carefully prepared. Every word has been debated. Every implication has been considered. What happens next will fundamentally alter the Canada-US relationship. Carney begins by describing the current moment as a rupture, not a transition. He argues that the post-World War II order, the one built on American hegemony and rules-based cooperation, has collapsed. He doesn't mention Trump by name. He doesn't need to. We are entering an era where great powers weaponize economic integration, Carney says, where supply chains become vulnerabilities, where tariffs become tools of coercion rather than instruments of policy. The audience is silent. This isn't the usual diplomatic platitudes about partnership and cooperation. This is a middle power publicly declaring that it can no longer rely on the superpower it's been aligned with for 80 years. Carney continues, "Middle powers have a choice. We can sit at the table or end up on the menu. Canada has chosen to sit at the table. We will forge new partnerships. We will diversify our relationships. We will ensure our sovereignty is not dependent on the goodwill of any single nation." When he finishes, something unprecedented happens at Davos. The audience gives him a standing ovation. Standing ovations don't happen at the World Economic Forum. The room is full of diplomats, central bankers, corporate executives. People who are trained to maintain professional distance, to stay neutral. But they stood, and they applauded. Because Carney had just said what dozens of other middle powers were thinking, but hadn't dared to voice. That American unpredictability under Trump had made traditional alliances untenable. That countries needed alternatives. Within hours, world leaders were praising the speech. Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden, called it very important and very well put. Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's former communications director, said it showed real leadership. Even Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum called it very good and in tune with the current times. But Trump saw something different. He saw defiance. He saw ingratitude. He saw betrayal. The next day, Trump gave his own speech at Davos, and he made his feelings clear. "I watched your Prime Minister yesterday," Trump said. "He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us, Canada. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, before you make your statements. Canada lives because of the United States. Not Canada benefits from partnership with the United States. Not Canada and America have a strong relationship. Canada lives because of the United States. It was the language of dominance, of ownership, of subordination. And it was exactly the kind of statement that made Carney's argument for him. Within 48 hours, Trump had withdrawn Carney's invitation to join something called the Board of Peace, a symbolic advisory council Trump was assembling. The invitation had never been accepted. Canada had been skeptical from the start, but Trump revoked it publicly anyway. The message was clear. You're either with us completely, or you're against us. Carney's response was measured but firm. He posted on social media, "Canada and the United States have built a remarkable partnership in the economy, in security, and in rich cultural exchange. But Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian." The contrast couldn't be sharper. Trump was asserting dominance. Carney was asserting sovereignty. And that's when the relationship truly ruptured. Fast forward 3 weeks. February 10th, 2026. Trump posts his demand about the Gordie Howe International Bridge. He claims the U.S. should own at least 1/2 of the bridge. He says it was built with virtually no U.S. content. He threatens to block the opening unless Canada renegotiates immediately. There's just one problem. Almost every single claim in Trump's post is factually incorrect. Let's break down what's actually true about the bridge. Canada paid the entire $4.7 billion construction cost. The United States contributed $0. The bridge is jointly owned by the Canadian government and the state of Michigan under a binational agreement signed in 2012. This ownership structure was established before construction even began. Once Canada recoups its construction costs through toll revenue, Michigan gets 50% of net toll revenues. Forever, without having invested a penny up front. The bridge was built with both Canadian and American steel, Canadian and American workers. Of the 15,000 workers on the project, 8,000 were American. Half the bridge, the Michigan side, was built entirely with U.S. steel and labor. So when Trump claimed there was virtually no U.S. content, he was either completely uninformed or deliberately lying. Canadian officials were stunned, not because Trump was threatening them, they'd grown accustomed to that, but because the threat was based on claims that could be disproven with a single Google search. Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkins went on CNN and fact-checked the president directly. Half the bridge, the Michigan half, was built with U.S. steel. The port of entry on the U.S. side was built with U.S. steel and U.S. building materials. And of the 15,000 people who helped build this bridge, 8,000 came from the United States. Michigan Republican leaders, usually Trump allies, pushed back too. They knew the bridge was critical for their state's economy. Detroit and Windsor form one of the busiest trade corridors in North America. Blocking the bridge opening would hurt Michigan businesses. But Trump wasn't backing down. He wanted a renegotiation. He wanted compensation. He wanted to prove that Canada couldn't do anything without American permission. And that's when Carney made his move. February 11th, 2026. Early morning. Mark Carney calls Donald Trump. The conversation is private, But both leaders later describe it publicly. According to Carney, he explained the basic facts. Canada paid for the bridge. Ownership is shared with Michigan. Both American and Canadian materials and workers were involved. The bridge is a symbol of cooperation, not exploitation. Trump, according to his own staff, asked that his ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, a Michigander, help smooth the conversation around the bridge. In other words, Trump blinked. Not completely, not publicly, but enough that Carney could tell reporters, "The situation will be settled." No dramatic climb down, no public apology, just a quiet acknowledgement that the threat had been a mistake. But here's why this matters. It wasn't the bridge that was important. It was what the bridge represented. Trump had tried to use American economic leverage to force Canada into submission on something Canada had paid for, built, and owned. And it hadn't worked. Because by the time Trump made his threat, Canada had already begun building the alternatives that made American leverage less relevant. The China deal, the trade agreements with India, ASEAN, and Mercosur that Carney announced days later. The 12 economic and security accords Canada had signed over the past 6 months. All of it adding up to one undeniable reality. Canada was diversifying. And diversification meant Trump's threats carried less weight with each passing week. Here's what Trump fundamentally misunderstood about Canada. For 75 years, Canada aligned with American interests, not because it had to, but because it made strategic sense. The relationship was asymmetric. 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States, but it was also mutually beneficial. Trump assumed that asymmetry meant control, that because Canada needed American markets, Canada would always comply with American demands. But asymmetry only creates leverage if the weaker party has no alternatives. And Carney was systematically building alternatives. The China deal wasn't just about canola and electric vehicles. It was about proving that Canada could forge significant trade relationships without American approval. The Davos speech wasn't just about middle power cooperation. It was about signaling to other countries that Canada was open for partnership. The bridge dispute wasn't just about infrastructure. It was about demonstrating that Canada wouldn't back down even when threatened. Each action, individually, looked like a tactical move. Together, they formed a strategic realignment. And Trump played right into it. Every threat made Canada's case stronger. Every insult drove Canadian public opinion further away from the United States. Every tariff gave Carney justification to diversify faster. The polling data tells the story. According to Ipsos, 68% of Canadians now think less of America as a country because of Trump's threats. 2/3 of Canadians say they will avoid buying American products or traveling to the United States for the duration of Trump's presidency. That's not temporary trade friction. That's a generational shift in how Canadians view their relationship with the United States. And it's exactly what Carney needed to justify his strategy. Here's the most damning moment in all of this. When Carney was asked by reporters in Beijing about the China deal, he made a comment that should have set off alarms in Washington. "Our relationship has progressed in recent months with China," Carney said. "It is more predictable, and you see results coming from that." More predictable. Think about what that means. The Prime Minister of Canada, America's closest ally, its largest trading partner, its partner in NORAD and NATO, just said that China is more predictable than the United States. Not more friendly, not more aligned, more predictable. Because predictability is what makes long-term planning possible. Predictability is what allows businesses to invest. Predictability is what makes partnerships viable. And Trump's approach, the constant threats, the random tariffs, the personal insults, the policy reversals, made the United States fundamentally unpredictable. Companies don't invest billions of dollars in countries where policy can change based on what the president saw on cable news that morning. Leaders don't build strategic partnerships with countries that might threaten to annex them on social media. So when Carney said China was more predictable, he wasn't praising Beijing's political system. He was indicting Washington's chaos. And that chaos was giving China an opening it hadn't had in decades. Here's what should terrify American strategists. Canada isn't unique. Australia is watching. They have their own trade tensions with China. They also have massive resource exports that America needs. If Canada can diversify away from U.S. dependence, why can't they? Japan is watching. Trump has threatened to withdraw American troops. He's demanded Japan pay more for defense. If Canada can forge new security partnerships, why can't they? South Korea is watching. Caught between American demands and Chinese pressure. If Canada can navigate between great powers through middle power coalitions, why can't they? Even European allies are watching. NATO spending demands, tariff threats, unpredictable policy shifts. If Canada can reduce exposure to American leverage, why can't they? Trump thought he was punishing one country for insufficient loyalty. What he actually did was demonstrate to every American ally that diversification is necessary for survival. And the consequences of that demonstration will last far longer than Trump's presidency. So let's return to the bridge. Why did Trump react so strongly to an infrastructure project he knew nothing about until that day? Because the bridge represented everything he was trying to prevent. Canadian-funded infrastructure, binational cooperation that worked without his input. A project that would benefit both countries, but didn't require American financial contribution. It was a symbol of Canadian independence. And independence was exactly what Trump couldn't tolerate. But here's the irony. By trying to assert control, Trump accelerated Canadian independence. The China deal happens faster. The diversification strategy gets more political support. Canadian public opinion hardens against American influence. Every threat Trump makes proves Carney's argument. Every tariff justifies more diversification. Every insult makes the case for alternatives. Trump is creating the exact outcome he's trying to prevent. And he's doing it because he fundamentally misunderstands what kind of leverage America actually has. Military leverage? Yes. America is militarily dominant. But Canada isn't a military threat to the United States. It never was. Economic leverage? It's real, but not absolute. Canada can't replace the American market overnight, but it can reduce dependence enough to make American threats less effective. Political leverage? That's where Trump has already lost. Because political leverage requires credibility. It requires allies believing that threats will be followed through rationally and proportionally. Trump's bridge meltdown destroyed that credibility. It showed that American threats might be based on false information, personal grievance, or simple misunderstanding. And once credibility is gone, leverage evaporates. The bridge will open, probably on schedule. Trump's threat will be quietly walked back, reframed as concerns being addressed or negotiations succeeding. The China deal will proceed. Canadian farmers will gain access to Chinese markets. Chinese EVs will enter Canada in controlled numbers. And the long-term trend, Canadian diversification away from total dependence on the United States, will continue. Not because Carney wants to break with America, but because Trump has made it strategically necessary. Here's what American policymakers need to understand. You can't have it both ways. You can't threaten allies with annexation, impose arbitrary tariffs, insult their leaders, and then expect loyalty when it matters. Relationships, between people or between nations, require trust. They require respect. They require the belief that the other party will act in good faith. Trump has systematically destroyed all three. And the cost of that destruction won't be measured in trade statistics or diplomatic incidents. It will be measured in the slow unraveling of the alliance system that's been the foundation of American power since 1945. Canada isn't breaking with America, but it is building the capacity to survive without American approval. And once that capacity exists, the relationship changes permanently. Because the next time America needs something from Canada, energy security, Arctic cooperation, defense coordination, Canada will have options. And options mean leverage flows both ways. There's a beautiful irony in all of this. The Gordie Howe International Bridge was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation, of two nations building something together that benefits both. And Trump turned it into a symbol of everything wrong with his approach to alliances. He tried to claim ownership of something he didn't build. He made threats based on false information. He demanded compensation for benefits he'd already received. He treated partnership as subordination. And in doing so, he proved Carney's entire argument. That the old bargain, America provides security and market access, allies align with American interests, no longer works. Because America under Trump doesn't honor bargains. It demands submission. The bridge will stand for a century, long after Trump, long after Carney. A permanent reminder of this moment when America's closest ally decided it needed a backup plan. Because here's the thing about bridges. They're built to connect, but they also provide an exit route. And Canada just made sure it has one. Everything in this story is based on public information, official statements, and documented events. It's not a call to action. It's not an instruction. It's simply one perspective on how a bridge dispute became a symbol of a much larger geopolitical shift. Reasonable people can see the same facts and reach different conclusions, and that's healthy. But no matter where you stand, the question remains: what happens when the world's most important bilateral relationship becomes a tool for coercion instead of cooperation? Canada is finding out. And the answer they're reaching is changing North American geopolitics in ways that will echo for generations.